Today's webinar, we're going to talk about background checks. And unfortunately, you have to look at me while doing that. Well, I was a lot chubbier in that picture. I'm going to change that. I don't want to look at that for too long. Background checks. A lot of people have questions about this. And so today, I wanted to go through this subject in some detail. We won't go through every nook and cranny and every angle on this, but we hope to help you understand why they're necessary and what the risks are when we go about doing background checks on potential employees or volunteers. And at the end of it all, we hope you learn some best practices to help you protect your organization, avoid lawsuits, make sure that you've got proper policies, procedures in place, because this is a challenging subject. All right, I'm going to go ahead and start a poll. So if you would respond to these questions, and I've got several on here. Oh, good, I can still see those. So the first question, and you'll just go in. Did that pop up on your screen, Doug?
Yeah.
Okay. So go through and answer these questions. Looks like people are getting started on that. And I can't read the entire question there. Does it? Can you see those, Doug, the whole question? Can you read those, please?
You can scroll it down, so it's got four questions there.
I figured out. Does your organization currently perform employee or volunteer background checks? Do you do those for employees, volunteers, or both? Or not at all? I missed that answer on there. Okay. The second one, who do you check? Do you check everybody working or volunteering for your agency or organization? Do you only check certain positions, or do you not check anybody? And then the third question, do you have a policy on background checks? Yes, no, or not sure? The last question, do you use a private agency, the Bureau of Criminal Identification, or both? Or none at all? So go ahead and answer those questions. Looks like we've got about 11 have not started. Some are in progress. And we've got a bunch finished. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and we'll take a look at this. It looks like the majority on the first question, are you currently performing employee or volunteer background checks? The majority, 11 of the 37, are doing both. 8 are providing it to are doing those for employees only. On the next question, who do you check? Looks like it's fairly evenly divided. 9, which is the highest number, are doing it for everyone working or volunteering for our agency. 8 do it for only specific positions, and 6 are not doing it at all. Okay. The next question is, do you have a policy on background checks? 13 do have a policy, 6 do not, and 6 are not sure. And on the last one, do you use a private agency, BCI, or both? And it looks like that BCI is the highest with 7, private with 6, and 3 are using both, and 7 are using none of those. All right. Thank you very much for participating in it. Did you expect much different out of that, Doug?
No,
that's pretty much what I expected as well. Kind of an equal distribution across the group. Well, I wanted to start out with the poll to kind of test the waters and see exactly what's going on out there. And I know not everybody responded. Some people may not know what's going on in their organization, and blah blah blah. It's not a statistical poll, but it gives us a little bit of a taste of what's going on, and that's really kind of what I expected. Well, as we were building our curriculum for this year, we threw background checks on our schedule for webinars, and I looked at last month I looked at what was coming up, and I knew my number was up, and I thought, oh, good, we're in good shape. I remember doing a presentation on this years ago. I've got one in the hopper. It's going to be not a major change over what we've done a while back. Well, then I got closer to putting the presentation together, and I found out I didn't have a presentation. And as I started doing research, I found there have been some pretty major changes in this issue over time. So I wanted to hit those and hopefully help you understand this is a complicated issue, and it's not as clear cut as it might seem. Recently, there have been some clarifications, new directions from the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. Also, the Fair Credit Reporting Act comes into play when we're doing background checks that maybe involve financial reports, and it gets very, very complicated. One other thing we want to learn about this is information access is not as easy as it seems. Now, if you go online and you do background and you type a Google search for background check, you're going to have hundreds and hundreds of different companies come up that say, we'll do a background check for you for anywhere between $20 and $100+. They'll do a background check, and they'll provide information. And some of those talk about that it's an instant check, that you'll receive that back right away. And you know, who can do this? Well, I could pick any one of you and go on and take your name and any information I know about you and do a background check. How valuable is that? Well, it kind of depends. How reputable are these companies that are doing background checks? Well, it kind of depends. Some are good, some are not. All right. So I'll apologize a little bit going into this presentation, because this is a complicated thing, and you're going to have to make some tough decisions when it comes to, do I do background checks? Who do I do those background checks on? And does it make sense for my organization and for all of these different positions that we have? We asked a question to start with: why background checks? Well, number one, everybody's doing it, right? If the crowd's doing it, we need to do it. 87% of employers do background checks. That's what the EEOC reports. That's pretty much everybody. What does that mean if you find yourself in that 13% of employers who do not do background checks? What do you think, Doug? I don't think Doug heard me. What do you think, Doug? If you're in that 13%, what does that mean?
It means you trust your own judgment, I guess.
Trust your own judgment, and if employees, potential employees, know that you're not doing a background check, you may end up with a higher percentage of people with problems. Same thing goes with drug screening. If people know that you don't do a drug screen, you probably end up with a higher percentage of drug users. So there's a pretty strong business need to do a background check, just to be on a level playing field with other employers. Other reasons why we might choose to do background checks, and this is probably the most common reason that many of you do background checks, and that is protection of those at risk, people that are vulnerable, children, vulnerable adults, where we're providing services. It might be a recreation thing. We have volunteer coaches that have access and are involved with children. We may have senior programs that put people in contact with vulnerable adults, people who could be taken advantage of by an unscrupulous person. That's probably the most common reason. Protecting our organization from loss. If we have people that have financial responsibility, fiduciary responsibilities, or they have access to valuables, whether that be money or equipment, and we have somebody that we hire somebody that has has a questionable past, what's the risk that we might have a loss? We'd have stuff go missing, those types of things. And one other concern is avoiding negligent hiring suits. What happens if one of our employees or volunteers goes off the rails and they kill somebody, or they do something, take some criminal act? Is there a potential we could be sued for hiring this person, putting them in a position where they're able to commit whatever act it was? So there are some really powerful reasons and a real push for us to do background checks. And for a long time, that's really something that we have encouraged our members to do as well, and we still do. However, we've got to go into it with our eyes open. Doug, you know who that guy is in the picture?
No.
That's Ted Bundy. Remember him? Yeah, one of the worst. I should have asked Brent. I think Brent said he
looks like a nice guy. I'd hire him.
He looks like a nice guy, doesn't he? Yeah. Looks like a nice guy. I'd hire him. One of the worst serial killers that has ever lived in this country, and he looked like a nice guy. He had a pretty good track record. That's why we do these background checks, is to help us understand who we're dealing with. All right. So who do we check? Let's just run through and talk about which people we would check. Sometimes we're required by law to do a background check, a criminal background check. Just for example, a CDL operator, a driver who hauls hazmat, is required to have a background check. There are other laws out there that require us to do a background check for people in certain positions. So we may not have a lot of choice when it comes to background checking for some of those reasons. The question that we had in the poll: every employee and volunteer, do we make the decision that, hey, you know what, we're just going to do a background check on everyone? I think traditionally this was probably the best practice, was to do that. But given current situation, it may not make as much sense to background check everybody in the organization. Do we only background check people that have duties with vulnerable groups, those that have access to children, vulnerable adults, or maybe fiduciary responsibilities, people who might be maybe be a clerk or a treasurer, would have access to funds, tax dollars at that we want to have somebody there who's going to be honest and not be a risk to our organization. How about confidential or secret information? I had, going out of college, graduating from college, I had a bunch of friends who ended up in federal service in various different agencies that required them to have secret, top secret, and various levels of security clearance. And I don't know why a lot of them put me on their list of references. They needed somebody who wasn't a relative to vouch for them. And I kind of questioned that. Hey, what if they ask questions about that time when we... Anyway, we had...
What time?
I don't know. I kind of blacked out there for a second. And so they would do background checks that would involve a phone call, and it was quite a lengthy phone call. Lasted close to an hour, where somebody on the other end was asking me a lot of specific questions about how I knew these people and what I knew about them. So if we find ourselves in those situations, those are people we may background check. How about volunteers? Many of you on there indicated that you do background checks on volunteers. And I think that's probably one of the major groups that we do background checks on average. If we bring volunteers in for athletic programs, recreation programs, as coaches, or other groups that have access to children, then those are people that we want to verify that they don't have a background that might lead them to do something harmful to children. Okay, Volunteers are essential to our operations. They're really an important thing. If we didn't have volunteers, we couldn't pull off a lot of the programs that we do. However, it also places it at risk. If somebody is a representative of our organization, goes out as a coach or other position as volunteer, and they hurt somebody, that places us at risk of suits. So what do we do with volunteers? I just want to hit this one quickly. We need to treat our volunteers very similarly to how we select our employees. We need to have some documentation that shows how we selected them, have an application where they will tell us information about them similar to a job application. This is what I'm doing. That helps us understand who they are and whether they can perform the tasks that we're planning on having them do. We need to do training and orientation for them as well. This is a real potential risk for us, but also a great opportunity. So we need to handle those right. So volunteers, I think, are one of those groups that we really want to look at doing background checks for, and I would say require doing that when they're involved with those vulnerable groups. Okay. So when do we do a background check? When's it appropriate? Can we do that? We take all of our applicants and send out. I've got a stack of resumes. I'm going to take that and send it out to a company or BCI to do a background check. No. The answer is we want to get down the road a ways to the point where we're giving an offer to a person. This should be a contingent offer. We're going to offer you this job contingent on you passing a background check, passing a drug screen, as well as passing what Doug talked about this morning. I'm not going to let him fall asleep through this boring presentation.
An MVR check?
MVR checks. So a contingent offer. This gives us some protection. We've given this person an offer, and we're only going to look at the information as it relates to the job that we're offering them. After we've hired somebody, though, do we need to do regular follow-up? I say yes. Things can change. People can be charged. We can have policies that require employees to notify us or volunteers to notify us if they're arrested or convicted of a crime, but they don't always do that. And so it's important to do a regular follow-up. All right. So what do we check when we're vetting an applicant, either a volunteer or for an employee position? Well, there are a lot of things that we look at, and I'll just hit some of these. Education. Do you ever verify that this person actually does have a degree or a high school diploma? Licensing records. If they tell you that they're a licensed electrician or something else, do you verify those things? Check their references and call up previous employers or people that they tell us that they are friends or acquaintances that they work with. Drug test is a background check. Social media, this is one that I'm not going to dive into, but that's a way that we can do a background check on an employee or potential employee. MVRs, Doug talked a lot about that this morning, checking somebody's driving record. And the one that we're really interested in are criminal records, potentially credit history or medical exams. Sometimes we may want to require people to prove that they're physically capable of performing a certain task, maybe looking at public safety or other positions there. We're not going to dive into that one today. I look to do something on that later. Why would you look at somebody's credit history? What is a credit history? Should I pick on Brent this time? Freak out. What does credit history have to do with somebody's ability to do a job? Oh, Brent didn't even take his mic off. Yeah, there he is. Are you there?
I'm here.
Okay. What does somebody's credit history have to do with their ability to perform a job?
Well, it may prove their reliability as far as how they are as a person and credibility there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, also the risk that they might engage in some sort of fraud. If someone's credit history shows some financial problems, they may be likely to commit some sort of fraud or
Yeah,
financial crime.
if this person is at serious financial risk, do we want to put them in charge of our checkbook? Do we want to put them in charge of something like that? So these are all valuable pieces of information. The ones that we choose to use are really up to us in most cases, and because somebody's doing a particular job determines which ones of these tests that we're going to do. Somebody who has we'll pick on somebody, a seasonal employee working out in our parks area, probably doesn't matter that much. We're probably not going to really care about their credit history, and it probably exposes us to more risk than is necessary for somebody in that type of a position. But somebody working as a treasurer probably would merit doing a credit history, a credit background. And let's see. Yeah, so I haven't been watching I haven't been watching the questions, so I'm just going to look over here. Paul asked, but didn't I hear recently from the state that we have to prove that credit checks are related to the job requirements? Yeah, exactly. And we'll talk about that in some detail here in a minute. But yeah, that's exactly right. We have to make a decision based on the type of position that they're in, what's appropriate, and the findings from the check that we do. Does it really matter to the job that they're doing? So more on that in a minute. Let's see, we've got another. For those of us who may not be doing background checks correctly, do you have an instruction sheet and a list of where we can go to do these checks? Yeah, I'm going to be sending out some documents. Some of those are from the EEOC. They're really the list of pitfalls and the way that you need to do it right. I hesitate to send out sample policies because the risk that we run with sample policies, or people have a tendency to just adopt those lock, stock, and barrel, and so I may send out parts of those or some specifics. I've got multiple documents that I'll send out after the presentation today. But yeah, really good questions. As far as those private entities, well, I actually have some stuff on that. So more to come on those. I don't know, Doug and Brent, can you guys see those questions when they come in? I'm looking at my other screen.
Well, I can see the one in the Q&A panel from Corey, but
okay, all right, I'll keep an eye over there. So let's talk about that. That actually leads us right into that. What about private agencies? How do we choose a private agency to give us an overall report that would include credit and other things? The reality is there are hundreds, if you do a Google search, there are hundreds of companies doing this. They have access to databases and they'll sell a report to you. Some of those reports are really good. Some of them are not worth the paper they're written on. How can you check out that they're a reputable company? There's an organization, the National Association of Professional Background Screeners. I believe that's right, the NAPBS. .com is their website, and you can check those organizations out. Ask them to send you a sample report. Many of their websites will have a sample report. If you ask for this is what your report will look like, and this is what you'll receive. Now, fair warning on this. Sometimes there's not much information on a given person, and that report might come back wide open, and you say, well, there's nothing here. Well, that's the risk that we run, and we may drop $100 or something like that into doing these checks. Okay. Then we look at the BCI, the Bureau of Criminal Identification. This is a state agency, and they provide information to us on criminal histories, criminal backgrounds. These are kind of two separate groups. The private agencies, they're going to provide some criminal information, but they may not be able to give us as detailed information as the BCI does. But they can give us that broad range of information. Where has the person lived? Have they had a bankruptcy? Have they had other other issues that we'd be concerned about. The BCI provides information that can help us. This is probably the base level of background screening that I would look at, and what you should be looking at for those people that are involved with vulnerable adults and children, is what's their criminal history. Okay, so let me go to this next one. So BCI, as a local government entity, you are entitled to this information, but you have to apply to become a qualified entity with the BCI. There's a form, and I'll send that one out, but you're best off to go right to their webpage, bci.utah.gov, and get the information from there. I think it's a 7-page report. I've got it here on my desk somewhere. I think it's 7 pages, lots of information that you have to put in to be able to qualify as a local government to get that. You also have to put in information about a point of contact. This needs to be a trustworthy person that has a good background themselves, and they will be the main point of contact with the BCI. They can do a couple of different kinds of checks. They can do a name search, which is similar to what you'll get with a private agency search, where they go and they look at the easy court records, the things that are publicly available. There's about 30% of courts in the country who will not make this information available unless you physically go to the court and make a request. You have to be on site to get that. So the name search has only limited value. The fingerprint search is something that is much more valuable, and that's what we would be looking at as far as those vulnerable individuals. If somebody's volunteering as a coach or for Meals on Wheels or something like that, where they have access to these vulnerable groups. And that's where they actually take a physical fingerprint. You can do those. You can become certified to take those fingerprints, or you can have them go into the local police department or other organization that does those fingerprints. They'll either do that as a physical card or a scan. They have a fast scan where it will actually use an electronic scan of your fingerprints. Those go in and they check multiple databases. The FBI is the de facto nationwide database. Is it complete? No, not necessarily. It doesn't have everything that could be available. The WIN is a separate one that covers 8 western states, but not California. Most of the western states are involved, but California is not involved, which has a tendency to feed people, employees, volunteers to a lot of our states. So it's good, but it's limited in its availability. These checks take time. Depending on the workflow that BCI has, it can be anywhere from 2 days to 2 weeks before you have any information back from them on this background check. So the best thing to do is, just my recommendation to you is call and talk to BCI. They're very helpful. As I was researching this topic, they were really good to give me information, and I think they will walk you through the steps and help you come up with a program that works best for you. All right, let me just check and see. Did we add any? Nope, didn't add any questions. That's good. I'll keep going. What's that, Doug?
Nothing.
Oh, I thought I
just breathed.
All right.
My breath.
All right. There can be, and there are problems with the data that we get from these background checks. Data is not always complete. If we base our determinations on an arrest record, does that mean the person was guilty of whatever they were arrested for? Not necessarily. They're innocent until proven guilty, but because they have an arrest record out there, that could cause us some problems if we base our decision on simply this person has been arrested. Okay. The data is not always accurate. Sometimes a record gets assigned to somebody with the same name, and it's not their record, not their conviction or whatever. And there have actually been people who have been imprisoned, not imprisoned, but have been jailed because they had the same name as somebody that their record showed had a warrant out for their arrest. The data is not always up to date, and so we've got to keep all of that in mind. Somebody may have had their record expunged, and it hasn't been up to date. It hasn't been made up to date yet. There is no comprehensive database that gives you information for the entire country and for every person that's out there. That's probably one of the biggest challenges. Well, there may be a comprehensive database, but it resides down at the point of the mountain in that NSA building, and we don't have access to that, right? I thought I could get a response out of that one, but there really is not a comprehensive database out there that will get us everything. That's why these background checks take time, is they're checking a large variety of different places. If we go to a private agency, they're going to look at our history of where we have lived, and they'll check court records in the same area around where we've lived, in addition to BCI doing the FBI search nationwide. Okay. We need to be very aware of making our decisions and what that means. We've got to be very careful about making decisions based on sketchy data without follow-up. And we'll talk a little bit more about what that follow-up is in a minute. I just want to throw out a few of the laws that regulate, authorize, and regulate what we can do in background checks. So there's the Volunteers for Children Act, Utah Code that talks about how these checks are taking place and authorizes our ability as a local government to make those checks. Laws that regulate what we're able to do and how we use the data would be the Civil Rights Act, that really guarantees people equal opportunity when it comes to employment. The Fair Credit Reporting Act comes into this. Anytime we pull a credit report, we become subject to the Fair Credit Reporting Act and some of the requirements that are in that. Who's watching? This is a pretty big hot button issue right now. The Equal Opportunity Employment Commission, the Federal Trade Commission, all are both regulatory agencies, in addition to others that may be out there, that can cause some enforcement action upon us if we don't follow the rules. All right, so we talked about equal opportunity. We need to be very careful when it comes to background checks to not take action based on somebody's protected class, race, religion, gender, those things that we talk about when we're talking harassment and discrimination. It should be the same process for all applicants. If we have a process to do background checks, we don't look at, oh, well, I know this guy, he's my friend, I'm not going to do a background check on him. Why do I want to spend the money or the time to do a background check on a guy who I've known for the last 10 years? We need to do the exact same process for that person as anybody, the person that comes in off the street and applies, or online and applies for the same position. So let's make sure that we're ensuring equal opportunity. Here's the kind of downside to doing background checks. Constitutional claims. If we deny somebody's constitutional rights by not giving them a fair shake at this job, we can have a claim. We can have a suit against us. And then we have two different subjects here: disparate treatment and disparate impact. And these have become kind of hot button topics in recent days, recent years. Disparate treatment. If we've been involved in hiring people, we pretty much understand what this is. We treat everyone equally when it comes to employment decisions. Everybody's on a level playing field, and we don't discriminate against somebody based on their membership in a protected class. Okay, we understand that. What is disparate impact? Disparate impact is a situation where we treat everyone equally and we still discriminate against a protected class. What the heck does that mean? Well, basically what it means is there might be groups of people in a protected class who are disproportionately represented in criminal proceedings. And there's a presentation that the EEOC has out there that shows that some races are imprisoned much more frequently, much more so than their percentage of the population than others. And so if we have a standard out there that says we will not hire somebody or we will not hire anyone who has a criminal record, we are disproportionately discriminating against that race or group, protected group status. And so we could be guilty of discrimination and some enforcement action from the EEOC. Well, this is a big deal, and it's kind of thrown a monkey wrench into how a lot of us looked at this. Well, hey, we treat everybody equal. We put them all through the same process, and so it's changed how we've had to look at this. Let's see. I'm just looking here to see if we've got. If you extend a contingent offer to a candidate based on a background check and then 2 weeks later find something on BCI, is it okay to then let that person go? Wow, I'm probably going to give you a conditional answer on that one. You should talk to your attorney about the actual process of letting them go. But I'll address the question in that if you give a contingent offer, don't hire that person until they have passed those tests. You know, you can say, okay, we will offer you the job contingent upon passing the test, but don't bring them on. Don't give them a paycheck until they've passed those things. That can really muddy the waters. And I'd encourage you to talk to your attorney about the specifics of can I terminate somebody who we've hired. There's probably a route to do that. You'd have to look at your policy, but definitely talk to your attorney about that. All right, so everybody's a little bit down right now. You're feeling like this guy in the Far Side comic here. It's either one or the other. Damned if you do or damned if you don't. What do? We've got requirements to do these background checks. We want to protect the kids that are out in our sports programs. But I don't want to get sued. I don't want to take away somebody's constitutional rights, and it sounds like a big headache. Well, that's kind of where we find ourselves, in between the need to protect the people at risk and the need to protect individuals' rights. So how do we handle this and still be able to make that all work? Here's some best practices to talk about. Yep, I'm going to be closer to the 1 hour, aren't I? Best practices. Policy, legal review, job descriptions, application process, and the criteria we use to review and controlling our documents. I'm going to go through each one of these, but right now I want to just talk about job descriptions. Ensure that you have a good job description that will explain the responsibilities of this person, help us justify doing a background check on applicants for this position. So that's the only place I had job description. I wanted to make sure that you know that how important that is. Same thing goes with job descriptions when it comes to workers' compensation injuries, the appropriate restrictions in that. Just look at your job descriptions, give them a good review. Okay, policy. Policy needs to say who, what, when, those things that are important. How do we operate our system? How do we go about administering these background checks, and what do we do with those once we receive the information? So I can't overstate the importance of having your attorney review this policy. This is one that with current changes with the EEOC, we need to review all of our policies and verify that we don't have some skeleton waiting in that policy to cause us some problems. A few must-have things that we have in our policies. Don't put a zero tolerance statement in there that says no felons, no, if you've got a criminal record, don't apply. Those kind of things are prima facie evidence that will get us into a lot of trouble and open us up to suits. Have a targeted screen process, basically that we go in and we look at the position and determine, and I'll talk more about this in a second, and determine how do we justify doing a background screen. Is it appropriate to exclude a person for a certain conduct that they've been convicted of or that we see in a screen? Is that justified for the position that they're working at? And then have a process to clarify results. If we are going to take an adverse employment action against a person by not hiring them or terminating them, do they have an opportunity to explain or clarify what those results mean on the background check? Sometimes it's something that is not, it's wrongly attributed to them. There's something on their credit history that they attributed it to a certain the same person with the same name, but it really doesn't pertain to them. It may be something that they were arrested for a certain infraction or a certain crime, but at the end of it all, they were cleared. And so we need a process to give them an opportunity to clarify what those results are. Okay, so on our applications for employment, we need to inform the applicants that they may be subject to a background check. But we also need to inform them that having a criminal record won't automatically eliminate them from the running. This is an important statement to have. Once again, though, don't include things like no criminal background accepted, no felons, no arrest records. If you put that in there in those terms, that's going to be a problem. And of course, protected class exclusions. We only want a certain gender to do this job, or something like that. Most of us understand those are no-nos, but definitely when it comes to criminal backgrounds, this is something that we've got to look at our applications and see what we're doing. And
dog.
What's that?
I want that dog.
You want that dog that cleans up after himself? Okay. I'm going to go back and just let's see. I had an idea of something to say, and then we talked about the dog, and I lost it. Okay, I'll have to remember that in a second. That's okay. All right. So reviewing the reports, what do we do? What do we look for when we review that? The answer is we look at the person's character and suitability for the job. It needs to be specific for the job. If we have that absolute, we don't hire anybody here who has a criminal record, that's going to be a problem with us, and people can make a complaint against us, and they'll probably win. So we have to ask ourselves the question: does the conduct in the report, and it could be an arrest, we can look at that, but does a conviction for a crime, does that relate to the job? Does it make the applicant unsuitable for the job? So if we're hiring a treasurer for our organization, and we have an applicant that has been convicted of grand larceny or embezzlement or something like that, does that relate to the job? Well, yeah, it absolutely does. They're a treasurer. They're going to be handling our funds. This is a position of trust. Does it make the applicant unsuitable for the job? They've got five embezzlement convictions. Yeah, I think that makes the person unsuitable for this position.
One might
but
be
we
okay,
take the same applicant, and we put them in a position where maybe their job is to clean up trash on the side of the road. Does embezzlement relate to the job? Well, no. They might be able to get off with some garbage bags, but it really doesn't relate to the position. Does it make the
Uh-oh.
How do we comply? So here's the language they use in there. Job related and consistent with business necessity. Did I freeze up? Uh-oh.
You're okay now.
Oh, okay. How much did we lose?
No, not very much. I turned my camera off and it came back up. So.
Okay. All right. I hope we got that point across. So the EEOC is the major agency that we're dealing with on this subject, along with the Federal Trade Commission. Here's the language they use: job related and consistent with business necessity. Okay, so that's kind of what we just talked about. Is it job related and is it consistent with business necessity? Okay. How do we make sure our policy is good and works? We need to validate that policy under the Uniform Guidelines and Employee Selection Procedures. For you HR folks out there, this is something that you've dealt with as far as equal employment opportunity, but there are some specifics that go along. Is our policy, is it valid when it comes to this? So that's something we want to look at on an individual basis. All right, so screening procedures need to consider the nature and gravity of the offense. How bad is it? What is it? Is it germane to the job that they're doing? And how bad is it? What's the elapsed time? If somebody shoplifted an item in 1973, is that really pertinent to what we're looking at? Probably not. How much time has elapsed? How bad is it? And then what is the position sought or held? So depending on what the position is, we have a different standard. Okay. All right, so if we're going to take an adverse employment action, what does that mean? That means we're not going to hire the person, an applicant, or maybe we're going to terminate somebody. Before we take this action, we need to provide the person, we notify them that we're considering an adverse action based on a report, provide them a free copy of the report, notify them of their right to dispute wrong or incomplete information, so they can look at what's there and they can say, oh, yep, you got me. I guess I'll just go away. Or, hey, this isn't me. Why is this on my criminal record here? And we also need to be able to provide them contact information for the company producing the report, so they can go to that company that we use to provide the report and make an effort to correct those things or clarify those things. If we used financial information, if we used their credit report from the various credit bureaus, then we have an obligation under the Fair Credit Reporting Act to provide them with a document called a Summary of Your Rights under the Fair Credit Reporting Act. Now, if we're using a private agency, they're actively involved with this, and so they should provide that along with the free copy. But to cover yourself, make sure you do that. All right. Just want to look. Let's see. Did I? No, I just want to make sure that we didn't have a bunch of questions there because I've covered a ton of stuff. Okay, document retention. This is specifically called out in the laws. How long do we need to keep those background checks? And the answer is, for local governments, it's 2 years. For a private employer, it's only a single year, but for local governments, it's 2 years. The second part of it is we need to understand confidentiality. There's some essential personal information in these reports that we don't want to have out as general knowledge, and it should be kept as a confidential record. So that goes right in their background checks, with drug test results, medical information, FMLA, all these things that we put in a private confidential record for the person, but we do need to maintain those for that time period. Okay, so just in summary, we need to go into background checks with our eyes wide open. I kind of had my eyes opened on this with a few of the changes that have happened, and so I think each of us need to look at our policies and our procedures, how it's actually happening, and determine, are we in compliance, and are we allowing people the opportunity to speak up for themselves? Are we following an appropriate program to evaluate how important is whatever the conduct is on their background check? How germane is that to the job that we're considering for them? Have a good policy, review that. I think it's a great opportunity right now for us to look at this, see if we've included some of the things that I've talked about today, and then throw that in front of our attorney and say, in light of the Fair Credit Reporting Act and the recent guidance by the EEOC, are we up to date? Why do I say that? Well, sometimes our attorneys are really good on one subject, and they may not be 100% up to current stuff on employment issues. Probably they're great, but just throw that out there so they understand where to look if they haven't kept that up to date. Ensure equal treatment and consistency among our hiring practices. Don't go out just because you know that person and say, we don't need to do it on this guy because I know he's okay. Communicate back and forth through the organization, particularly with the applicants, volunteers, so they understand what's up. This is the requirement of the standards, and so we have to do that communication. And here's a thought I had on here as I went through a lot of this stuff. I thought, well, we all need to check our own records. As we've seen, there can be inaccuracies, there can be problems. So you can start by getting a free credit report. So there's a number there, so we can check it. And I'm going to go out and do that for myself. That should be something we do once a year to see what's on our record. You know, the criminal background could be a little harder to obtain, but you might pay some money and see what's out there. Go to a private agency and see what's there. All right. Oh, good question, Belinda. How long do we need to give them to dispute the record? I'm going to punt on that one, and I'm going to. I'm not sure if we've got a specific requirement on that, but I will. There's a Q&A out there, and I will find that. And as I send out the materials for this, I will answer that question. Great question. All right. I think we've covered all of that. Okay. This may generate some questions. Please go ahead and type those into your chat box or into the Q&A box, and I will do my best. Doug, Brent, any thoughts? I talked a lot.
I think, you know, one of the takeaways that's really important is that concept of disparate treatment versus disparate impact. You know, and that's something that, you know, may be new to some of us and something that we, you know, need to make sure we understand. You know, we may be treating everybody the same, but because of our processes, it may be something that is more likely to have an adverse impact on someone in a certain group.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
I don't see any other questions, Jason. Looks good. Did great.
The only thing I can see is Corey told me I've been talking too long. So thank you, folks, for putting up with me that long. I apologize. I know we told you it's going to be 45 minutes, but it's a big topic. Welcome your questions. Welcome your suggestions. If you have a policy that you've just redone and your attorney's gone through it and you'd like to share it with others, that's the great thing about being in government. We're not in competition. We can share things. You've got a great one out there. I'm happy to send that out with the caveat that everybody needs to build their own policy and have their own legal review because it is very site specific. Okay. All right. Well, you're welcome. We've got some thanks coming in. I appreciate everybody's time. Give us a call, give us an email if you have some questions, and we appreciate all the work that you do out there. We appreciate you participating in our training programs and working hard to prevent these losses because we're all in it together. Dividend checks are going out this week, I believe. So anyway, there'll be a little present under the October tree. So, all right. Okay. Anything else, guys?
Nope.
All right. Thanks so much, guys. Have an awesome day, and we will talk to you soon.